Welcome to this webinar, Lebanon, 1 year after the Beirut Port blast. To begin the program, we will now view a brief trailer for the award-winning movie Enough, Lebanon's Darkest Hour. Thank you.
Dear Lebanon, your location and your diversity put you at the hub between continents and cultures. You have an impressive ability to absorb hardships. Yet you rarely confront the causes of them.
Who the hell is responsible?
I still can't get the images out of my head. The explosion took me reeling back to the days of civil war.
At the end of the war, the warlords were given promises of public money.
We have the same politicians, the same ones killed. They're still here, which is like, what?
You have so much vested interests in the system, which led us to this very tragic situation.
لماذا لم تبادر هيدي المواد المتفجرة?
And why didn't the president do anything about it?
I don't know.
Corruption is eating up everything in the country.
We have to buy bottles of water, which costs more than petrol now.
The crazy floating power station.
The system will not be changed from the top.
Elections are the only tool that we have.
I don't believe the voting process is legitimate.
So are you still confident with your decision?
100%. If we do not fix ourselves, the people will revolt against us.
We Lebanese people, we're strong. We're very strong, and we're stubborn.
What is your dream for Lebanon?
To become a nation.
We are Lebanese! All of us! Shame on you for dividing us!
These politicians, they deserve to be in jail. Enough is enough.
Dear Lebanon, you're too important to let fail. We believe in the idea of Lebanon. The thing is, Lebanon, do you still believe in that idea? This is a question only you can answer.
Wow. What a powerful and timely way to introduce today's program. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ed Gabriel, the president of the American Task Force for Lebanon. And what a very moving way to start this session. And I hope we can see the movie before too long, a movie directed by Daisy Gideon. You know, today we want to thank you for joining for this observance of the Beirut port explosion. You know, we have often heard the calculations in terms of casualties, property, and services. Yet we still don't have an answer on why. Why is there no proper investigation? Why did it take 10 months for senior officials to visit the blast site? Why does the leadership stand by while Lebanon sinks deeper into the abyss, you know, while the Lebanese people and the refugees sink deeper into despair? I will delve deeper into these questions during our conference today with key experts and policymakers. Let me just say first that ATFL and its members are proud of the supporting role we have played in partnership with congressional supporters, Ambassador Shea and Secretary Blinken, to ensure that the US Congress and the Biden administration doesn't forget Lebanon and take concrete steps to support the Lebanese people. As many of you know, yesterday the president announced an additional $98 million in assistance, which I'm sure Ambassador Shea will discuss today, and other government programs that go directly to those affected. You know, this follows closely on congressional resolutions that have come out recently expressing solidarity with the Lebanese people, supporting Lebanon's sovereignty and independence, and calling for continued U.S. support for the people and the Lebanese armed forces. We are committed to continuing these efforts to secure additional funding for Lebanon and the efforts by the U.S. and its international partners to bring about the conditions that result in the government committed to reform. So today we have 4 panelists who provide their insights into Lebanon a year later, the human costs, what the United States and the international community are doing to be helpful to the Lebanese people, how they help to encourage Lebanon's leadership to support a reformist government capable of addressing the needs of the people, and what are the others in the region doing to help or maybe even hinder that recovery. We hope you'll find today's session useful and illuminating. We're going to divide the session into 2 parts. The first will feature U.S. Ambassador Dorothy Shea, who's on the screen with us here today, and UN Special Coordinator Joanna Wronecka. Thank you both for being with us. The second part features Dr. Michel Mawad of the Lebanese American University and our own Paul Salem, president of the Middle East Institute, who's our esteemed colleague and partner in the Lebanon Working Group in Washington. The panel today, following these opening remarks, will be moderated by Jean Abinader, our policy director. Let me first introduce our 2 speakers and then ask Ambassador Shea, followed by Ambassador Wronecka, to open the dialogue with their own remarks. Dorothy Shea is the current ambassador to Lebanon, as you know, and she's had been senior foreign service minister counselor rank. She was in Cairo, the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. She was director of the Office of Assistance for Asia and the Near East, the Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration, and she served in other places in the Middle East. She's been recognized for many awards, but most of all, we at ATFL recognize her as our good friend, an excellent representative of the United States. Again, thank you for being with us. Dr. Wronecka was appointed as the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon last year, April 2020. She brings 25 years of experience in diplomacy, international security, and Middle East affairs. She was permanent rep for Poland at the UN, under Secretary of State in her own country, and ambassador to Morocco and Egypt. Too bad we weren't there together. I'm sure we would have been close friends in that role as well. And she's been non-resident in Mauritania and Sudan. Again, thank you for being with us today. I should say she's a fluent Arabic speaker and has studied the Arab philosophy as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the virtual floor first over to Ambassador Shea. Again, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Gabriel. It's an honor to be here on this panel with you, and also to the UN Special Coordinator, Joanna Wronecka. Pleasure to share this space with you, and just want to give a warm welcome to everybody who's out there with us, Dr. Mawad as well, and Paul Salem. And thank you for taking the time to help us think through the many multi-layered challenges that Lebanon is facing. I'd like to acknowledge the fantastic partnership that the US Embassy and the US government has with the American Task Force on Lebanon. Like the US government, you guys have been a committed partner to the Lebanese people, and I applaud you for your ongoing efforts and assistance. In fact, last April, when I was visiting Tripoli, I had the opportunity to highlight some ATFL assistance in the form of a donation that you made of personal protective equipment, PPE, and other medical supplies that you provided to a local hospital there. This type of aid, in addition to the support that the ATFL has provided with the Lebanon Relief Project, is critical to helping the Lebanese cope with the myriad challenges that they're confronting. And it gives hope on an individual and a community basis, which is so desperately in need right now. So I'll return to the theme of assistance shortly, but I'd first like to offer a few thoughts on the 4th of August. Yesterday, we marked the somber one-year anniversary of the Port of Beirut blast, which was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. In commemoration, the US Embassy stopped operations to honor the some 230 lives lost. And a couple weeks ago, I paid my own tribute by visiting a site near Martyrs Square, where an American artist named Brady Black has memorialized the victims with individual portraits around an entire city block. So as we walked around that block, he told me some of the stories that he had heard from the family members who survived these victims. I also saw a face of a friend, someone who left behind a grieving husband and 2 children. A poignant reminder, if one was needed, of the human dimension of the explosion. And yesterday, in solidarity with those who lost their lives and those who loved them, the US Embassy observed the National Day of Mourning, and we had a moment of silence at 6:08 p.m. We were dark on social media. And although we were silent on social media, we are fully behind the people's calls for accountability, which were heard wide and clear yesterday. The United States has done our part to contribute to the investigation through the FBI. And we now look to the Lebanese authorities to follow through on the information that the FBI and others provided them. The victims deserve accountability. And accountability also applies to the government formation process. With a new prime minister designate in place, we are reiterating our calls for urgent action to both form a cabinet and to enact the much needed political and economic reforms. In the International Support Group meeting on Tuesday, we discussed the growing humanitarian crisis, which is now plaguing Lebanese families in unprecedented numbers, with between 50 and 60% of the population living below the poverty line, a stark drop since the last time I spoke with you all. Given these parameters, the International Support Group expressed the need for action. And I'd like to read one line from our joint statement. The ISG observed with deep concern the accelerating economic deterioration that has severely affected all segments of Lebanese society, its institutions and services. So this quote reinforces, in my view, the need for contingency plans for the unfolding humanitarian, economic, and social crises. As we formulate these plans, we need to reevaluate where exactly we are on the continuum from conflict to post-conflict to recovery. We need to better understand what steps we could and should take to forestall any number of variations of what a worst case scenario might look like in Lebanon. We need 3 key components in our Lebanese strategy. In all 3, we need to be working with like-minded countries to identify complementary efforts that draw on our respective advantages. Because Lebanon's multi-layered crises can't be solved by just one donor. And first and foremost, we need the Lebanese themselves to take the lead. But on top of that, we need collective work and coordination with like-minded countries and organizations in the international community. And I would include the ATFL in that. Yesterday's French UN hosted conference in support of the Lebanese people, the 3rd such international conference since the blast, was one such effort. But here are the pillars. First of all, to provide humanitarian support to the people of Lebanon. As you mentioned, Ambassador Gabriel, President Biden announced yesterday $98 million in new humanitarian assistance. So we're not just repackaging old assistance. This is new assistance that the US government mobilized on an urgent basis. And for the first time, the majority of USAID's funding for food aid in Lebanon is going to the Lebanese themselves. For the last decade, we have been providing food assistance primarily to refugees, while also helping the Lebanese destitute communities in the surrounding areas. But this funding that President Biden announced will provide food aid to 400,000 extremely needy Lebanese. And last month, together with colleagues from USAID, I had the opportunity to visit that food aid in action. We visited a grocery store where customers are able to use a special debit card provided by the World Food Program in partnership with us and other donors to help fund their basic food purchases. We also visited a food distribution center where beneficiaries are able to collect in-kind donations of foodstuff. And in both of these programs run by the World Food Program, I am proud that we are helping to combat this growing phenomenon of food insecurity. These were efficient operations to keep food on the tables. But I also had the opportunity to see firsthand how these, hyper-inflating, increasing prices are making it impossible for those who are living on fixed incomes in Lebanese pounds, let alone those who have lost their jobs, to provide for their families. We have reached a point where cash card assistance is now barely sufficient to purchase a couple bags of rice and lentils. The situation is dire and we cannot ignore the long-term societal impacts. So as such, we are trying to augment job creation and entrepreneurship programs to help provide sustainable solutions during this economic downturn. And USAID is at the forefront of this effort with initiatives like Promoting Sustainable Livelihoods, a $10 million intervention that will sponsor income-generating projects for up to 2,500 people. So that's humanitarian assistance. The second component of our strategy is the need to find new and creative ways to support our trusted partners who help maintain security, stability, and sovereignty in the country. And I'm talking primarily here about the Lebanese armed forces, but also the internal security forces and the individual troops who staff them. These organizations are the backbone of Lebanon's security and stability, and plummeting exchange rates are weakening the ability of those on the front lines in the security forces, but I would also add to that those in the hospitals and the schools to provide for their families. Speaking of schools, we are hearing that families are now having to choose between paying for tuition and paying for food. Doctors, nurses, teachers, and numerous other professionals are looking for work outside of Lebanon. Lebanon has always been a beacon of accomplishment and expertise, but now so many people embodying these defining skills and abilities are leaving at very high rates. The Lebanese need our support to survive, and they need hope for the future that will encourage them to stay. So I think this means we need creative solutions to mitigate the brain drain. Now, the US government continues to provide funding for higher education, such as through the University Scholarship Program with AUB and LAU. And this year, we will use part of our basic education support to distribute food boxes to children, and they will also help their families in need. The third element is having a coordinated diplomatic strategy. So the international community has been emphasizing the urgent need for reform since well before October 2019, when the Lebanese first took to the streets to protest government corruption and mismanagement. But those in positions of power did not heed our advice, and billions of dollars in project assistance tied to the CEDRA reforms was lost. So Lebanon needs an empowered government that will actually implement reforms, that can talk to the IMF, that can begin the painstaking process of rebuilding confidence in the economy. But Lebanon's political leaders, left to their own devices, appear to lack the discipline to make this happen. So to change this dynamics, we need that diplomatic strategy to have just the right mix of carrots and sticks. So let's start with the sticks, because those get a lot of attention. The French have been leading the way with sanctions against those obstructing government formation and reforms. The EU has also recently followed suit with a framework for sanctions. The United States has already imposed sanctions against Hezbollah and many individuals at the heart of Lebanon's corrupt political system. And we can expect more in the pipeline, perhaps following the French model. We hope that this approach can help induce the change in behavior of the political class to stop putting the interests of their party or sect ahead of those of the Lebanese people. Now, we also need some carrots, and the main one I would say is the IMF. The Lebanese economy desperately needs an infusion of liquidity. We know that they will be getting some $865 million in special drawing rights as part of the IMF's worldwide draw for COVID mitigation. It is important, it's vital that this money be used wisely. Whichever country or countries convert those SDRs into usable currency, they need to make clear that that money should not be used to prolong the bad habits that got Lebanon into this current state of collapse. And domestically here in Lebanon, there should be a societal level debate about how these SDRs will be used with transparency and accountability. But the bigger potential infusion of cash will be in the form of an IMF rescue package, potentially. The World Bank is also active, supporting both the emergency social safety net and more recently in trying to broker creative solutions for Lebanon's energy and electricity sectors, which are both riddled with corruption and failing miserably to meet the needs of the Lebanese people. So I referenced the need for a societal debate. What does that even mean? How does one convoke civil society? Who are they and who do they speak for? Good questions. Well, I have met with some representatives of civil society. Several were represented at the conference yesterday, hosted by the French and the UN. Others were represented last week at the 3RF, which is the Relief, Reconstruction, et cetera, fund for in the aftermath of the port of Beirut. I honestly don't know which groups are most representative. There are a lot out there. And contrary to what some conspiracy theorists would have you believe, they are not under the influence, let alone the control of the US government. Now, some commentators criticize civil society groups for their lack of unity. The charge is that those who took to the streets in October 2019 knew what they were against, but yeah, corruption, cronyism, etc. But they haven't gelled behind a vision of what they're for. I would posit, though, that even among these diverse groups with whom I've met, there is a consensus on some aspects. They want a government that is responsive to the needs of the people. They want to address the root causes of the economic collapse, corruption. And they are adamant about holding elections on time in 2022. Last year here at the US Embassy, we brought together a group of political party representatives from across the political spectrum to participate in a virtual exchange program on elections and civic engagement. Every one of these participants, regardless of affiliation, wanted to see more women, more youth, and a government that meets the needs of the people. I had the opportunity to meet with this group again last week, and I gotta tell you, I am inspired every time I talk to them. They give me hope that the future can improve. And at the same time, though, we have to be realistic about the full extent of the ongoing challenges, be they economic, social, political, humanitarian. What I commit to you is that through it all, the United States will keep stepping forward to help, to stand with the Lebanese people, and to try to reverse this dangerous trajectory in the crisis. We need more help, both in the form of donor aid and donor engagement. We are grateful for the continued support from the ATFL. And as I have said many times over, we are in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was very important remarks you gave. And, you know, I was thinking about the audience in America right now and in Lebanon and perhaps other countries, and how reassuring your words are that the United States has not forgotten Lebanon. So thank you so much. Joanna, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much again for being with us. This is a special day for us to have both of you.
Good evening from Beirut. I am very honored and thank you, Ambassador Gabriel, for this opportunity to interact with this important gathering of distinguished panelists. I'm also pleased to be joining Ambassador Shea in this discussion. Allow me maybe to share with you a few reflections. First, on the anniversary. Yesterday, August 4th, marked a somber day of commemoration for the people of Lebanon, the first anniversary of the terrible explosions at the port of Beirut. For the Lebanese people, yesterday was a day of mourning and prayer. It was a day to recall personal and collective loss. We as UN family, with also colleagues from the diplomatic community, we honor them by a minute of silence very early in the morning. Allow me to say a few words about socio-economic situation. Indeed, in the years since the tragic explosions, life for Lebanese has worsened. In the context of an enduring political deadlock on government formation, Lebanon's currency has all but collapsed. Recently, economists at the American University of Beirut assessed that average household food bills cost 5 times more than the monthly minimum wage. Essentially, in a matter of months, about a third of Lebanon's national wealth has disappeared. There now are severe shortages of fuel and medicine, electricity, which now exceed 18 hours per day, affect the food supply and supermarkets and also the abilities of hospitals to function. There are increasing incidents of violence at petrol stations as people queue for hours to fill their tanks. Over half of Lebanese people are now living in poverty, according to our assessment. 1 in 3 suffer from food insecurity. Up to 4 million Lebanese are at risk of not accessing safe drinking water. None of this is due to war or to a natural disaster. The people are paying the price of their leaders' inaction. It is no wonder they are angry. On political factors, 1 year has now passed without a government, 1 year of political impossibilities, 1 year without reforms and concrete measures, a wasted year. Mr. Mikati is the third candidate after Mr. Hariri and Mr. Ahmadib, nominated by President Aoun to form a new government. Yet the same obstacles appear again and again. Cabinet shares confessional representation, ministerial names. Directly or indirectly, all of the major parties are seeking to influence the outcome. It means the election in 2022. What does not appear to be on leaders' minds, it's the urgency of the situation, the welfare of the people. They need to set aside their own differences and work in the public interest. In all my meetings with Lebanon's political leaders, on all sides, I have urged them to make the necessary compromises, to make an effort in good faith to arrive at an agreement that works for the people of Lebanon. I have emphasized that there is no time to lose because the people are paying the price. And with each day that passes, they pay a higher price. I have been clear that responsibility rests within Lebanon's leaders. Once they begin to take the first responsible steps, the international community will support them. Ambassador Shea, but also Our partners on the international support group have all convened similar messages with increasing frequency and urgency. Many high-level delegations have visited Lebanon from abroad also with these messages. The Security Council, who I recently briefed, is anonymous on the urgent need for reform. But at stake is not just the formation of a government. There are deeper interpretations of confession and identity and the future of the internal Lebanese balance. In this sense, Lebanon is at historical juncture. A new model is needed, but I don't believe this will be resolved soon. On institutions, not only are the people suffering hardship, but key institutions of the state are now struggling to function. We are concerned by the health sector as fuel and power shortages are directly affecting hospital operations and essential medicines are in increasingly short supply. Should electricity and fuel shortages continue, it is unclear if Lebanon schools will manage to open in September. The Lebanese armed forces are one of the few state institutions with national credibility and which symbolize the unity and sovereignty of Lebanon. They are an indispensable partner for the UN's peacekeeping operations in the south. Yet the LAF are under severe financial pressure and are unable to meet the immediate needs without international support. The commander, Joseph Aoun, has highlighted the basic human needs of LAF personnel, food, medicine, and salaries. If these needs are not met, the cohesion of the army will weaken. Lebanon's wider security and stability will also weaken as a result. No one can afford this. I know the Ambassador Shea shares my concern for, and we are working together with other partners to support the LAF in any way we can. On the question of salaries, all creative options need to be explored. Finally, democracy is a defining Lebanese institution. The elections scheduled for 2022 are perhaps the most significant of the recent past. They will give a voice and a political role to those who have been striking for crisis, to the youth and to the women who have led in popular demands for change. Elections are not yet certain to take place, yet if trust is to be restored in Lebanon, they must happen on time. We must press for this. You have the right to ask what UN is doing. The UN has stood with Lebanon for decades. UNRWA began work here in Lebanon in 1949 and UNESCO in 1950. UN agencies, and the number is 26 present in Lebanon, a good number, provided vital assistance to people of Lebanon during and after the 2006 conflict. Since 2011, the UN has channeled some 10 billion in humanitarian and development assistance to Lebanon. Several more billions have been spent on peacekeeping and the role of UNIFIL. UN personnel were amongst the first responders to the Beirut explosions, and the UN worked immediately to mobilize international assistance. We have worked with the World Bank, the European Union, and Lebanese civil society for the recovery and reconstruction of key sectors and their eventual reform. The UN is now launching a 12-month emergency response plan to address the country's growing humanitarian needs. The UN and donors have stepped in because the people need support. But I must emphasize that international assistance does not and cannot substitute for the responsibility of the Lebanese leadership. I am in Lebanon since 2 months, and I am impressed by the people of Lebanon. Lebanon possesses an impressive human capital, a prosperous, generous diaspora, an energetic, educated youth, a dynamic private sector, and a vibrant cultural scene. What the country needs is now a new model of consensus, development, performance, and delivery. This must begin with the Lebanese first, but the international community can't make a difference, and UN is there to help the Lebanese people. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. We really appreciate your participation and your good words. You know, I was thinking about the size of Lebanon against the $10 billion that have been sent there. Obviously, the UN cares a great deal about Lebanon, and you've been a great partner over the years, not only with the United States support, but as a leader to really help the social, economic, and financial needs of the people. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite Jean Abinader, our Director of Policy, to jump on with us right now. And if you don't mind, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Jean, I'm going to ask you to ask the first question wherever you want to go. I'll take the other person.
I'll start with Joanna, since I'm just learning how to pronounce her name. Great to have you with us, but I'm wondering, most people, when they think about the UN in Lebanon, they think about UNIFIL. And yet you mentioned a number of other programs that the UN is providing. Plus, we've read just in the last week, 2 weeks, the UNICEF report and the UNESCO reports on the water situation in Lebanon and the children's situation in Lebanon. Can you give us a broader scope of what the UN actually does in Lebanon besides UNIFIL?
Yes, with pleasure. I already mentioned that 26 agencies of UN are present here. We have the resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator in one person, Madam Najat Rufi, who is coordinating the development and humanitarian assistance. So allow me maybe to look to our presence since 10 years, because it's a good perspective. Let's start with the Syrian crisis, because UN helped a lot Lebanese authorities and Lebanon with the presence of the Syrian refugees. It was the role of UNHCR and UNDP, almost 1 million Syrians. But for many years also UN supported the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. It was done through UNRWA presence, another very important agency. Traditionally, since the creation of the mission of Special Coordinator, so we can say since 2006, we are a very close partner with the Lebanese army. So this is the role of AMSCO. It's a support in source mobilization and donor coordination. This is mainly my role. But also since 2009, we are very much involved in the process of elections, helping national election commissions, and we will do this next year. This is mainly the role of UNDP. I should mention the support to health ministry, hospital during pandemic, water issue, education through UNICEF, but also vaccination, national vaccination. And the most important, I think, as a proof of a good coordination is the creation last year of 3R framework. It means is as a special, we can say, program in cooperation between the United Nations, European Union, but also World Bank, to reform Lebanon. So we have a reform, reconstruction and recovery. This is a very ambitious program. Ambassador Shea mentioned this because we had the meeting last week or 10 days ago, where we include not only recovery as a consequence of the explosion, but also very ambitious reforms like independence of judiciary, of course, like the role of reform in microeconomy, financing, the role of elections. There are 8 sectors, very important sectors. And I should emphasize the role of World Food Program recently, because thanks to their practical capabilities, experience, we can immediately help people by providing cash, humanitarian assistance, and this is important. Now we are working on a completely new program, emergency program for 1 year, as I mentioned, on an exceptional basis to help Lebanese people in the field, in the humanitarian. This could help also them, especially the families who are affected by the crisis, to deal with the social and economic consequences.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful. Ed?
Yeah, thank you very much for that detail. Ambassador Shea, I just want to let our audience know how unusual it is to ask our ambassador to Lebanon to get on an airplane, go to the Gulf and talk to the Saudis. That doesn't happen every day. You've been empowered by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, obviously, to fix this problem as best we can within our ability. I'm so impressed that the administration has asked you to go beyond our borders to the extent you can. And you talked about number 3 on your list was a coordinated diplomatic strategy. What better example than you and the French ambassador going to Saudi, Secretary Blinken meeting with the Qataris, the Saudis, the French, multiple times. It really shows a priority on Lebanon. Can you delve down a little bit and tell us the truth about how well a coordinated diplomatic strategy is going? And will we really see one that's powerful and has the strength to make a difference?
Well, thank you for the question. And I agree. It's pretty unprecedented. First of all, I mean, occasionally ambassadors do travel to other countries in the region, but to travel jointly with the French ambassador. So you have 2 ambassadors from here traveling to Riyadh. And it didn't happen in a vacuum, of course. It happened shortly after the trilateral meeting on the margins of the G20, where the French, the US, and the Saudi foreign ministers got together for a trilat. And, I feel that it was really important because Saudi Arabia has a huge role historically in Lebanon. And more recently, because of frustrations, I think, that they have felt over the situation here, they have not been as active. And we wanted to pitch to them the idea that the situation is so dire that there are humanitarian concerns, but there are also national security aspects to it that are implicated for them as much as for us and for the French and others. So we discussed that, and I kind of pitched it as an opportunity for us to share information with one another. And here I think we have learned lessons from other diplomatic challenging circumstances where sometimes those who are in the thick of a problem might not appreciate how dire the situation is, because you kind of get used to the new normal. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen to us. So I want to make sure we are on the lookout for indicators that would trigger our taking out those contingency plans that I referred to earlier, and really focusing on forestalling a devolution in what has been pretty much of a downward spiral to the point where things become unstable here. So as I said, no one can do this alone. And the Saudis were very interested in what we had to say. They also need to study it from their own perspective and consult with their higher ups our visit was kind of billed as a working level visit after the ministerial level on the outskirts of Rome. And I see it as one element on a continuum of engagements. I fully expect that there will be more interactions with the Saudis, and we'd like to widen the circle to include others as well, because we do think that the collective impact, whether with carrots or with sticks, as I talked about, and having a united front as donors, that we want to help Lebanon, but we need a partner here, which means we need an empowered government, not as an end in itself, but as a vehicle to get those much needed, long overdue reforms going. And we know we can't expect a lot in a short period of time, but we also know that it's not going to take moving mountains to begin to change the trajectory here. A few key steps can have a big impact. And we want to channel that from these three countries, sort of representing three different constituencies. If we bring ourselves onto the same page, and we can bring others in with us, we have a lot more of a powerful impact potentially with the Lebanese.
Thank you. You know, we're getting a little over scheduled here, Joe. I don't know, it's your panel next, so you can determine timing on this, but I would say maybe we just jump into and ask each of our guests if they've been looking at the Q&A at all, or otherwise want to say a few things before we close off. I should mention to Ambassador Shea that the question of sanctions have come up. Why is it only targeting one group or one class of people or one party? And there's a couple other questions there. But going beyond that, maybe I give the floor to each of you to make any concluding remarks you'd like to. Joanna, do you want to say a few words before we thank you?
It's very kind of you. So I am looking always for incentives for myself. So Lebanon needs today the focus on the people, needs more political responsibility, better performance, and to put the public good or public interest as a top priority. There are my messages. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution, your new position, and for all the UN is doing to bring attention to Lebanon and helping solve the problem. I don't think the Lebanese people would be where they are. The little bit that they have to hope they have in the future is a lot because of what the UN is doing. So you should be very proud of your work. Ambassador Shea, the same for you. Please.
Thank you. And I just took a quick look at some of the questions that have come in, and I don't want to monopolize your time because I know you've got much more to cover. But I would just say two themes that I saw there were a hunger to know more about sanctions and what the rationale is and who we're targeting and why. And maybe some skepticism about the ability to have reform when you're still dealing with the same political leaders who have been in place, who have potentially been involved in corruption themselves. So I take those points on board. I will tell you, and I tried to hint at this, it was never the intention of the US government to sanction only one community or person. But the way these sanctions move is they're on their own timeline. So, and now we have kind of widened the scope beyond the Global Magnitsky Act, which of course we invoked last year to sanction Gibran Bassil, and beyond the foreign terrorist organization related sanctions, which have been a staple of US policy in Lebanon and beyond. But there are other authorities under US law and regulation that could allow us to be more aligned with the kind of sanctions that France has ventured toward. And this is really targeting those who are obstructing government formation or the reforms that are so desperately needed. And so as we do so, I will just reiterate that it's not about penalizing any one person or sect. It's really much more focused on changing behavior, using these sanctions as a tool to promote change. That's a far better outcome than actually having to implement the sanctions. But for sanctions to be effective, you need to be willing to implement them. And as for the, the how to tackle corruption when you have an endemic problem that touches all aspects of society and political groupings, that's a conundrum that we face every day. And, we will do our best here, but there are certain people in positions of power who we must deal with as our interlocutors here. And I don't want to forestall our efforts to try to help at least build momentum in the right direction, because we're waiting to have, a perfect interlocutor across the table. So take the point, and we will remain vigilant that we are not contributing to the phenomenon of corruption with our vetting and cross-checking of the assistance that we provide, for example. And, you can help keep us honest as well. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you. You're great representatives for the United States of America and for the UN. We couldn't have two finer people representing the country, and especially today, I think what you showed, I think our audience of over 200 people on today's call, was that you really care about the country. The United States does, the UN is prioritizing it, and people should have some hope that they are well represented with both of you. So thank you so much for this time together. Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. I want to welcome, and then first of all, I have to thank Joanna and Ambassador Shea for your great contributions, and you really make a difference for us, and we're really glad to have you as friends to Lebanon and friends to ATFL. Thank you so much. I want to move on to the program. We only have about a half an hour left, and what we really want to get on to now is looking inside Lebanon and outside Lebanon and see what's going on. We couldn't have two better people to address this than Dr. Michel Mawad, the president of LAU. You can read his bio if you like to, and Paul Salem, the president of MEI. You can read his bio somewhere. These are people who are well known, and they've been contributed for years. We asked Dr. Mawad specifically because he's lived the life of the expat Lebanese. He was born in Lebanon, has been a doctor in the United States. He's been assigned to senior level positions in hospitals and clinics, has served also in Dubai, I think, in the Emirates. And now he's back to Lebanon, first on the staff, medical staff at LAU, and now as president of LAU. And we're so proud of being a partner with him and working with them to try to help the Lebanese people. And we want you, if you have some time, Michel, to describe the conditions in Lebanon currently. How would you capsulize Lebanon, the impact on the educated, the brain drain issue, and your prognosis for how it looks for the next, let's say, through the election?
Thank you, Mr. Abinader and Ambassador Gabriel, for putting this webinar together. I also want to thank Ambassador Shea and Ambassador Wronecka for all the help of the United Nations and the US States government for Lebanon. I want to also welcome my co-panelist, Dr. Salem. Perhaps of all the problems we are facing as an institution and as a country, the one with the most serious impact now and over the long run is the brain drain that we are witnessing. I would tell you that over about 15 to 20% of our senior physicians relocated outside Lebanon over the past 12 months. Almost all of them held senior positions, such as heads of department or chiefs of section. Worst of all, those who left for greener pasture were American trained, and they trained at the best American institutions. This is a special breed that we worked hard on attracting to our institution, and their loss really represents a major blow to the quality of our teaching and the quality of our patient care. Both of these items are really suffering with the brain drain. And rebuilding this talent pool is really going to be almost next to impossible. It'll be very expensive, to say the least, and will take a very long time to materialize. And the brain drain and other crisis-induced challenges at LAU are really but a microcosm of the general agony the country is going through. Countrywide, well over 2,000 top physicians and multiples of this number among other professionals, including nurses, engineers, teachers, IT specialists, businessmen, bankers, and others have left the country. If they have not left yet, they are thinking of leaving. So the brain drain threatens to deprive our country of its most important asset, making the Herculean task of rebuilding the country's economy and reforming its broken politics even more daunting. So that's in the nutshell the suffering we're going through because of the brain drain, unfortunately.
Why don't we switch, because we're constrained on time, to bringing both of you into the conversation. Paul, he's given us a look at the brain drain issue. Can you tell us something more about civil society and politically going forward, what's going to happen with the elections, how you feel, what's the prognosis in terms of civil disturbances if the situation doesn't occur, what will happen in government formation? I mean, you've got a full plate just on what if. Can you help us? You just got back from Lebanon.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. I want to add my voice to thank Ambassador Gabriel and the ATFL for organizing this event. And I do want to salute President Mawad, leading one of the big institutions in Lebanon at this very difficult time. It reminds me of the big institutions that tried to survive the Lebanese civil war for 15 years, keeping as much as they can afloat, suffering an enormous brain drain, but trying to be there the day after to build the new Lebanon, as it were. No doubt Lebanon is going through one of its deepest crises in the last 100 years. It's comparable to the setbacks of the entire civil war. The country has been set back several decades in terms of its social and economic conditions, and in terms of the stability and capacity of their major institutions. President Mawad gave an excellent set of examples from the educational and health sectors. It is the same across all of Lebanon's major institutions. At the same time, this is one of the rare moments in the last 2 years when there has been a major public awakening. It started in October 2019. We saw it again yesterday in the 1-year anniversary of the Beirut blast of August 4 of last year. So there is political movement afoot. The challenges are numerous. We are facing an entrenched political class that's been there at least for 30 years, but many of them have roots going back to the militias and mafias of the civil war. We have a complete armed army, if you want to call it that, Hezbollah, which has its own defense, security, foreign relations, military forces, and they under the direction generally of a foreign country, Iran. These are not normal challenges for any people or any country. The civil society and popular groups also face their internal challenges. They seek to be more unified. They seek to agree on a more sort of coherent message to present a clear alternative to the alternative provided by the traditional sectarian oligarchy. Much progress has been made, but still more progress needs to be done. The success of these groups partly hinges on the holding of parliamentary elections in the fall of 2022. I think we haven't talked enough about that. I think it's the intention of the ruling oligarchy not to hold elections next year. Obviously, they've done this many times before. So the Lebanese people, as well as the international community, should be very focused on putting pressure on the governments and the ruling class to make sure that there are elections held. That means that there needs to be preparations afoot in the autumn of this year. There are things that need to happen very quickly. That really connects a little bit to the problem of government formation. Clearly, the ruling class has not been in a hurry to form a government. I think this is a fairly transparent move because they do not want to take responsibility for the collapse of the public finances, the banks, and soon the subsidy programs that are experiencing a melting away. So they've kept a disempowered government in place, the government of Hassan Diab, for one entire year, while the country, the public finances, the economy, subsidies, electricity, all collapses, and they don't want to take any responsibility for it. The new Prime Minister designate Mikati seemed initially to be hopeful. I think he's becoming a bit less hopeful as the days go by, but we'll see. If he does form a government, he needs to right away implement some immediate reforms and start talks with the IMF to show that this government is not like the previous ones, that this government is serious, and his government, if it's formed, needs to begin preparing for parliamentary elections. If government is not formed, which I think is quite likely, this caretaker government needs to do more. It's been very, very disappointing that the caretaker prime minister, yes, there are things that they cannot do as a caretaker government, but there are things that they can do. And I fear that the prime minister, the caretaker prime minister, has been avoiding even doing the things that he can do, he says, in order to put pressure on the political class. But if his government is still in place by the fall, his government has to prepare for parliamentary elections. So there's certainly a lot going on in a very difficult and very challenging situation.
Oh, that's really helpful and leads me to my next question for Michel. Michel, given the gridlock in government and potential formation of a new government, if you were giving them your top 3 steps that they need to take to improve the living conditions of Lebanese people, what would those 3 be? 3 top priorities or 4, whatever you think they are?
Well, first is the provide healthcare for the general population. Really, the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse under the weight of the resurgence of COVID-19 pandemic, the shortage in physicians and nurses due to significant deterioration in the standards of living, and their immigration and flight out of the country, and the imminent lifting of the government subsidy for medicine and medical supplies, which has become scarce and in some instances impossible to find. So they really have to do something about access to healthcare to the general population, not only the poor people, but even the middle class and everybody. Hospitals are facing significant challenges in staying afloat in the face of recurrent power shortage, skyrocketing prices, lack of drinkable water, scarce diesel fuel, and other basic necessities. As a result, hospitals have significantly increased their fees and are requesting hefty deposits from patients as a condition of the admission. You see, here in Lebanon, healthcare now is moving quickly towards the medicine of the rich, unfortunately. Those who can afford it will receive care. There's still very good care and very good physicians, but you have to be able to afford it. And those who cannot will not, unfortunately. So they will be, unfortunately, relegated to the public health service, which is itself inadequate in the best case scenario and is bankrupt. So first and foremost, healthcare. It is essential that they reform healthcare, they fund healthcare, they make better, more beds for patients, and really take care of the basic necessities. And healthcare is the first one. Second, and as I'm biased here, they really need to help the educational sector. The schools, intermediate schools, high school, the entire schooling system, and the higher education system, such as the universities. Students are not able to get into classes. People have gotten impoverished, and parents are not able to afford tuition. neither in the classrooms at, say, at the secondary level, nor in the universities. Some of them are taking their kids out of the schools and or the universities. There must be a support system, especially for the tuition, and to help kids to stay in classes rather than going out on the streets. We at LAU have made a tremendous effort to increase our financial aid. Our financial aid now amounts to $80 million a year. 80 precious $million a year are spent in one institution just to supplement the kids to stay in the classrooms. And I know AUB is doing the same thing. We need help. The government must find a support system for the schools and the education, especially higher education. And third, which is very important, is to provide a safety network, not only for the entire families, but specifically for the children in Lebanon. Children are suffering. About 30% of children in Lebanon are going to bed hungry. This is unacceptable. All the NGOs, the United Nations, all the European governments, the European Union, the United States must really bear in mind the plight of the children in Lebanon, in addition to the plight of the entire family. But children are vulnerable. They cannot find medication. They're sleeping hungry. They're being sent to work at age 6 and 7. This is unacceptable. These, in my opinion, are the three most urgent needs that the government should address: healthcare, education, and the welfare of children.
Wow, thank you very much. I wish there was some light message we could put in there, but we can't, obviously. Paul, Michel's mentioned the impact internationally. Brain drain is drawing Lebanese technical and experts outside the country, professionals. The international community is helping provide humanitarian assistance to Lebanon. I'm interested, since you were in Saudi Arabia right before you came to Lebanon, in your perspectives on the regional impact or the role that the region is playing in Lebanon, for good or for worse. Is there something we can look forward to, or hopefully as the US government help protect Lebanon against, in terms of the coming year, all these threats that are emanating from the region?
Thank you, Jean. Let me, if I may, I wanted to build on what President Awad's points were about what should a new government do, what are the urgencies, and I would completely agree and underline those urgent social and humanitarian concerns. In other words, pay attention to the people first. I would add two other components, the economic and the political, that a new government must obviously work with the IMF and with international donors, must immediately put in place the elements, the obvious elements of a reform, an economic reform and rebuilding strategy. I think if that's done quickly and if it's done with coordination of the IMF, it will bring support from members of the international community, both internationally and in the region, and it would begin restoring confidence in the Lebanese economy. And confidence is what's needed to stop the collapse of the Lebanese pound and to begin turning this economy around. And the collapse of the economy has caused all this distress at the humanitarian level. So the humanitarian and the economic are very much linked. And the third major category is the political. Obviously, the social contract between the people and the ruling class has been broken. It's been broken at least, obviously, for the last 2 years. And beginning to bring political life to Lebanon means setting in place the mechanisms for a free and fair parliamentary election in May. Keep in mind that 2022 also includes local municipal elections. There are about 1,000 municipalities across the country. That is a major developmental and political event that must move forward. And it also involves the election by the new parliament of a new president. So that 2022 is the year of political opportunity or political change, and any new government must make clear that this political opportunity is going to take place. When looking at Lebanon's regional and international context, I think it's very important to note that the international community, largely mobilized by France and the United States, but it also includes, let's not forget, all the other European countries. It includes Russia and China, so it's a global effort. They are of one voice, wanting to support Lebanon, valuing Lebanon's stability and its recovery from the many setbacks that it's had. So we couldn't ask for a more supportive global and international community. They are all with one voice, linking this assistance to necessary reforms that need to be taking place in Lebanon by an empowered government. All of that, I think, is very, very positive. When we look at the regional environment, obviously Lebanon is a very difficult one. To our south is Israel and our fights and tension between Israel and Lebanon, obviously between Hezbollah on one end, and Israel has led Lebanon into many conflicts and much instability and keeps investment away, and that still is something that's far from being resolved. Lebanon, because of the existence of Hezbollah, is stuck in the US-Iran track, whether it's escalation or negotiation. And a lot of what happens in Lebanon, sadly, is a sideshow occasionally, at least from Hezbollah's perspective, frequently to what Tehran wants and what Tehran's priorities are. To our east is a failed state, a collapsed state, still largely in civil war, which is the Syrian state. We have 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. We have no economic real interaction with any of our immediate neighbors. So it's a very, very difficult neighborhood. Yes, I was in Saudi Arabia last week, leading a delegation there, meeting with a lot of the officials. They echo many of the concerns that you hear around the world. That yes, we'd love to help Lebanon. We've helped Lebanon many, many times before, but all of our help and money has gone into the pockets of corrupt politicians. Billions have been following billions without any positive effect. And look where the situation is now. We're not willing to throw good money after bad. If at some point you have a good government that's clean and empowered, then we would be interested to work with others to help that new movement and new government. And the second thing they mentioned, which many others mentioned, is that, look, this is not a sovereign country. This is a country, much of whose decision making is controlled by an armed army, basically a group that works with a foreign country, Iran, and they call a lot of the shots. They've used their guns for domestic purposes. So we'd like to help Lebanon, but Lebanon is not completely Lebanon at this point, and we have a problem with that. But I think our challenges in Lebanon, obviously, are of long standing. Turkey has shown some interest in Lebanon, has some presence here and there, but is really not in a position to be a major player. And I think much of the region is largely disengaged as Lebanon, kind of by the combination of crisis that it's going through, is unable to move forward. But I think if we were to form a new government or have new political movement in Lebanon, we'd find a lot of friends and a lot of support in the international community and also some in the region.
Well, you raise a number of great points and things we could go on for hours, but I like to pay attention to the Q&A we're getting and to the people who have been putting questions in the box. Some of them are very political in terms of what should we do to end the corruption and how do we retrieve the money that's been lost? I mean, questions that we could have been debating for days and months and are beyond, I think, the scope of this presentation. But I'd really like to get back to one of the points that you made, Dr. Mawad, about health, education, and humanitarian assistance. How would you characterize the internal civil temperature of Lebanon? In other words, are people becoming more separated back into their sects, into their villages for self-defense? I mean, I don't mean military self-defense, but just to take care of themselves. Is there more crossing of lines like the demonstration that we saw yesterday where you had common prayers by Muslims and Christians? Are we seeing October 17th again, or is Lebanon as a country becoming more polarized?
You know, Mr. Abinader, I think poverty unites people. I think the vast majority of the youth of the Lebanese youth today are broke and broken with really no end in sight. They are depressed. There are a lot of cases of clinical depression among themselves, but that they have come together. In my opinion, what you see on the streets and what you saw yesterday, it really crossed the religious lines. It seems to me that we're all so desperate and so helpless, and they feel really impotent and imposed upon by a militaristic government, so to speak, that they have united together to change the status quo. And so, in my opinion, they have not, or at the present time at least, although it might come in the future, there is really no sectarianism between those who are suffering. Misery really loves company, it seems to me. However, I really like what Ambassador Shea said. Since the cataclysmic explosion at the port of Beirut a year ago, yesterday, events have, unfortunately, in my opinion, settled into a slower and somewhat accepted pace of a new normal, so to speak, or a state of daily misery that the Lebanese have almost gotten used to, unfortunately. Lebanon now, to me, seems stuck in a sluggish decline, more akin to a chronic state of decay. Yes, there was an explosion a year ago, but this year has done so much damage to the society and to the fabric of society that people have almost gotten used to a new normal. And there is this ugly feeling, this malaise that Jimmy Carter used to talk about, of decline, a more akin to a chronic state of spiraling decay of the standard of living and of the fabric of society. Lebanese seems to have slowly, unfortunately, given up on themselves and on their country. Those who have the know-how or the means that enable them to immigrate have done so already. And those who have not stay because they cannot leave. This is the same category of people that cannot run away, that has strayed almost into a state of aimless drifting and despair. They desperately are clinging to signs of normal life and hope in a better future, far away from infighting or fighting each other. They almost feel trapped in an imposed state of helplessness within a political system that has become increasingly despotic and military in nature. And it is quite reminiscent of the Iron Curtain that fell over Eastern Europe after World War II. I urge the ATFL and everybody involved and everybody who cares about Lebanon, I urge you not to let this 21st century Iron Curtain fall over Lebanon and trap its people in a world of endless darkness and despair. We must do something. We have to do something. The Western world has to do something before it becomes too late. It is almost getting to be too late.
Paul, you have a particular expertise in civil society in Lebanon. So I want to build on Dr. Mawad's response. Is there the potential for a real breaking out of this malaise that he mentions? Have we gone so far down in the hole that there's not going to be a response, effective response from the people of Lebanon to counter the political class in the elections? Let's say they go ahead with the elections. Will we see a resurgent civil society that organizes itself in any number of different coalitions that will help bring some hope and some expectation of change through the electoral process in the spring next year?
I think the change at best will be limited. Political organization doesn't happen overnight. You're talking about a civil society, a group of citizens who rose up in October and again many times after that, including yesterday. That's different than organized political parties, organized political life that can win an election. Keep in mind, the Lebanese society has not really had an engaged political life maybe for 50 years, back to the 60s. The Civil War erased all of that in favor of militias and sectarian division. And in the post-war 30 years, it's been the case that much of the society was politically dormant and went along with the status quo. It really was, in 2019, when it became clear that the whole economic and social structure was collapsing, that people awoke and realized that they had to take matters back into their own hands. Don't forget that the leaders that are in power today had just been elected the year before 2019. So change will be slow. I think we have to look at this in a longer perspective, 5 to 10 years. The objective in the short term is for the groups and the people who are, in the hundreds of thousands as a population, realize that the old system no longer works. The challenge for them is to organize, to unify, to mobilize. As I said, both domestically and internationally, we must make sure that the elections are not postponed. And I think if efforts are successful, we might see a limited change in the next parliament, maybe 10 new, 15 new members of parliament outside of the traditional political class. You might say that's not much, it's not a revolution, but I think that's realistic, and it would be the beginning of change. I do think protest movements also have their importance. Most revolutions around the world do not happen because of elections. They happen because hundreds of thousands of people take to the street. And Lebanese protesters have tried that again and again. But the political class backed by Hezbollah seems not to care how many people go on the streets. One after a criminal blast, nobody has apologized, nobody has resigned. An entire governing class claims absolutely no responsibility on it. Obviously, if this happened in Japan, everybody would have resigned the same day. So this oligarchy really doesn't seem to care about the fate of its people. To my mind, this is a long-term struggle. We have to organize, despite the fact that many people will leave. Many people have to attend to their families and their interests. But Lebanon will go on. There will be a tomorrow. There will be an after tomorrow. And if enough people are awakened, if enough people organize and mobilize, change will come, even if it's limited. I need to sort of make clear that that change is limited to the things that we can impact ourselves through politics and economic and elections. That does not apply to an armed group like Hezbollah. We've seen that when things don't go their way, they're willing to use their arms. We've seen next door in Syria how they and their allies have been willing to go to an outright war to maintain a regime. So let's have no illusions that we can change. We can change some things, but there are others that need much bigger efforts than what a Lebanese voter or Lebanese citizen can do.
Thank you, Paul. Dr. Mawad, would you like to give us your last thoughts before we close our program?
Yes, if I may, as a Lebanese and as an American citizen, as a resident of Lebanon now, I'm an eyewitness to the mayhem that's going on. I should say that the country is on the verge, if not already, it is there at the total breakdown. Some people think it is already there. The three sectors that we mentioned have historically built the success story that was Lebanon, namely higher education, healthcare system, and the banking sector. system are under enormous pressure. And the healthcare system is really on the verge of collapse under the weight of the acute shortage in physicians and the lifting of the subsidies. I find this picture heartbreaking, especially in terms of its devastating impact on the young who are simply being robbed out of a future and a bright future. We need to do something.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you, Paul, for joining us this afternoon, I guess it is now. And we appreciate all those who are with us. But one last word I want to make, just picking up on what Dr. Mawad said. ATFL's been very proud to be part of the worldwide response to the humanitarian and health needs of the Lebanese people. As you know from so many sources, the situation today is by far approaching the worst calamity since the Spanish flu 100 years ago. I hear from my family and friends in Lebanon on a daily basis about the psychological, social, and civil damage that the people continue to endure. And I am very aware of the donor fatigue that many of you are experiencing, having given generously to Lebanon this past year. Yet I'm asking you one more time not to forget our fellow Lebanese. Please reach out to our partner, the Lebanese Relief Project. We are in great need of funding for shipping medicines and medical supplies that have already been contributed to Lebanon. The generosity of hospitals and drug manufacturers in the United States means that we now have over 150 containers ready to go to Lebanon, but we don't have the money to ship them. So we need funds, approximately $100,000, to pull together the shipments, to send them to Lebanon and distribute them in partnership with our friends, the Lebanese Red Cross, the Hariri Hospital, the LAU Hospital, AUB, and others. We have very good partners in Lebanon, the Mawad Foundation and others, who are trustworthy, who work directly with the people. So everything that goes to Lebanon goes directly to the people. So we really are asking you, please send your donation of funds so that we can help alleviate the suffering and pain of what's going on in Lebanon and take our responsibility as Americans, Lebanese around the world, and others to help. So doesn't matter the amount, just LebanonReliefProject.com. We would appreciate anything you can do. And I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank our previous panel, and I want to thank Ambassador Gabriel for making all of this available and possible. And to let you know that a recording of the program will be available on YouTube shortly. God bless you, God bless Lebanon, and God bless the United States.